So my name's Michael Hand. I'm Professor of Philosophy of Education at the University of Birmingham, and I edit a pamphlet series for the Philosophy of Education Society of Great Britain that's called Impact. And the point of the Impact pamphlet series is to try to bring philosophical work on education to the attention of policymakers and practitioners and politicians in a way that's a little more accessible than the sort of work that typically gets published in academic journals. So we're on the lookout all the time for articles that have a real relevance to educational policy and practice, and to try and encourage authors to represent the ideas that they initially represent in a very academic format in a much more accessible way to people who work in education and who make educational policy. We're principally targeting, as I say, policymakers, politicians, practitioners, people who work in schools or who work for the government in developing educational policy. They're our first and foremost audience, but we are also hoping that these pamphlets will be of use to students, to people studying education, either as beginning teachers or people who are just studying it as an academic discipline. And we also work very hard to give a media presence to Impact pamphlets. So we have a press officer who assists us in getting newspaper coverage. We also have a team of willing volunteers to try and promote the pamphlets and the ideas in them on social media and engage with the debate on Twitter and on Facebook and wherever the debate's happening, on blogs. So our last few topics, we've had probably our most successful pamphlet in recent years, at least in terms of media coverage and impact, was a pamphlet by Andrew Davis on the teaching of reading by synthetic phonics. Andrew's principal target there was the idea that there are such things as teaching methods that can simply be replicated identically by any teacher in any school with any group of children and will work equally effectively wherever one does that. So Andrew isn't attacking the idea that phonics is one useful way of tackling reading with young people, but simply to say that there can't be a sort of prescriptive package, that there's just one right way of teaching reading and everybody has to follow that script without deviation. We've also had pamphlets in recent years on remembrance in schools, the way in which schools try to mark Remembrance Sunday, poppy appeals, and whether there is sufficient attention to the question of what exactly we're doing when we remember war in schools, and the danger of celebrating what it is that's happened on battlefields in a way that may be a bit jingoistic or a bit unhelpful or uncritical. We've had a pamphlet recently on teacher education. So there's a big change in the world of teacher education at the moment. There's a big shift towards training teachers in schools rather than in universities, and along with that shift, a decrease in emphasis on educational theory and research as crucial components of initial teacher education. And so that pamphlet focused on what it is that universities have to bring to the table, why it is important that beginning teachers do have some acquaintance with philosophy of education, psychology, sociology, some understanding of ethical issues in education, and aren't just sort of plunged into the classroom and it's not an entirely practical course, but that it does have a theoretical component too. Our next pamphlet, which is released in a month or so, is entitled Should Students Have to Borrow? And is on the contentious topic of student fees. The author of that pamphlet, Chris Martin, argues that students shouldn't have to go into heavy debt in order to attend university, and he makes a case for the value of higher education in people's lives as being analogous to the value of healthcare and basic education in people's lives, and as being something the state should provide for all those who want it through taxation and not asking individuals to pay up front for a higher education. Beyond that, we have in the works a pamphlet on character education, which is a big platform of the current government's education policy. So a critical look at exactly what's involved in character education. A pamphlet on the education of gifted children or highly able children, something on which the current government's actually been quite quiet, although has in the past been a major focus of education policy. It's sort of somewhat fallen off the radar, although interestingly, just yesterday, Nicky Morgan had a fresh announcement on what schools should be doing to stretch the most able pupils. So that's another pamphlet that's forthcoming. And finally, one on the regulation of faith schools. We have a couple of authors who are working on a funded project at Warwick University, who are going to write something on exactly what the state should be doing to monitor and regulate what happens inside faith-based schools.